ethanol, the clean alternative fuel that got shoved aside through a series of unfortunate events. It was the fuel the Model T was designed to burn. It was the fuel that all auto manufacturers designed engines to run on. It burned far cleaner than kerosene, cleaner than oil. It was in demand and it was abundant. Then, the U.S. government saw it as a cash cow when it needed a tax plan that would help pay for the Civil War, a tax that increased the price of ethanol to more than $2 a gallon in 1864. Kerosene back then was taxed at 10 cents. Then, in 1920, Prohibition banned the production of ethanol because it was alcohol. Despite burning cleaner, despite solving what is known as engine knock, and despite cleaner emissions, ethanol has languished as a fuel. It's a solution that is readily accessible and frequently overlooked. Mark Roche, a car lover, vice president of the Auto Channel, and an accidental environmentalist, is leading the charge to invigorate a passion for ethanol. A fuel, he says, is the answer we're looking for. It's the answer to our energy needs. It's the answer to energy self-sufficiency. It's the environmental solution that already exists. We invited Mark Roche to join us for a conversation that matters about why ethanol gets so little respect as a fuel and why we need to learn to love it.
Conversations That Matter is a partner program for the Center for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
Welcome. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for coming up from Sacramento to come and talk to me about this.
My pleasure.
I think very important topic because everywhere you go, particularly in North America and Europe for sure, and other jurisdictions around the world, there is this conversation that we're having about carbon. And even though carbon out of tailpipes isn't the number one source of carbon in the atmosphere, it is a contributor.
Yep.
And we're all looking for ways that we can reduce carbon. And you say that ethanol is the answer, despite ongoing campaigns to say no, no, no to ethanol. Why do you say ethanol is the answer? What is it about ethanol that gives us this opportunity to still drive our cars and not have the guilt associated with releasing carbon into the atmosphere?
Ethanol is the first automotive fuel. It was the fuel used by Samuel Morey when he first invented the internal combustion engine. It's the first fuel that Nicholas Otto used. So ethanol, alcohol, is the fuel. Now, let me move away from the history for a second and go to the other. If you take a cup of gasoline and you take a cup of ethanol and you put a flame to it, billows black smoke. Big, ugly
the
black
gasoline
smoke.
does, yes.
Right, gasoline does. If you put a little funnel and a little white cloth on top, the white cloth becomes black, right? So all the particulate matter, all the debris, all the junk. You go over and you do the same thing to the ethanol, you hardly see the flame. You hardly, and there's nothing builds up. So if that happens,
right,
that says right there, less carbon, less everything, less particulate matter, less everything that can hurt you. On top of that, gasoline has benzene in it, has what's called aromatics. It's a stupid word that makes you think that it's, oh, that's like, smells good, it's good. It's not. Aromatics are benzene, toluene, and xylene. And they're all poison. So you have poison gas, gasoline, petrol, in your case, combined with the aromatics. And so it's triple, quadruple poison. So this is all coming up in the air. Ethanol doesn't have that. So that's
just by the very nature of burning,
right.
You're going to have a different output.
Right.
Yeah.
And you could say, well, modern cars have gone a long way to curing that, and catalytic converters have gone a long way to helping that. And that's true, except that you have smog checks. Like, for example, in California, you have to get your car smogged every couple of years. Well, if the new cars take care of that, why would you have to have it smog checked? Well, because sometimes it doesn't work properly and it goes bad, right? And people are forever having to get things tuned up and figure out ways to pass the smog tests. So what happens is we're getting all that crap in the air. And some of that, such as benzene, there was an interesting study done by the American Petroleum Institute, right? That's big oil. They did this like in the late 40s. And the study was about benzene. And the study was to find out what percentage of benzene, or how much of benzene, how little of benzene would be okay, how much is okay to get into the air. And their study came back and said 0. 0.
Their studies.
Right, their studies.
And they published this.
And they published it. And I have copies of it, and of course it's on the Auto Channel. But it's 0. Now,
And yet it's in gasoline.
it's in gasoline, and it burns. And it goes, it's in the air. And it's one of the things that causes, among other things, Alzheimer's, autism, respiratory illnesses, and all those kinds of things. And so it says it. So now we have people who run around and they say, oh, there's just as much carbon and bad stuff from ethanol. There's not. The way that they get to that is to say that the farmers, or in the process, in the production process, we have farmers who are driving diesel tractors, diesel equipment. And that equipment is burning diesel, and so it's bad. And so they factor all of that in to get to this point of saying that there's bad carbon. However, farmers could actually use ethanol, biodiesel made from ethanol. So they don't have to burn that. And not only that, but they conveniently forget that in the oil business, there's also trucks that are delivering petrol, gasoline, that are burning diesel. And they forget that there are ships at sea who are burning this stuff. And they forget that we have armies and navies and Air Force people around the world who are burning these things in order to protect that whole industry.
Just got to get you to hang on for a second while we take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back.
Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program.
So you've written a book about this,
Yes.
and the ethanol papers, and you say that there are considerable efforts underway to keep the ethanol story suppressed.
Yes.
Why? Why suppress that story if, as you have pointed out, there are clearly benefits to burning ethanol over that of gasoline?
Well, the answer, of course, is economics, corporate economics. Now, I'm a capitalist. I'm like major capitalist, right? So I have no problem with capitalism and business and corporate and all that stuff. I'm not a tree hugger or whatever you want to say. But
So there's your credibility.
Right.
Okay.
So I'm into all of that. But we have a question or a case of the oil industry just being so large, so important, so big, so much money, that they just have bought all of this, all of the tutelage, the patronage, the politicians, and so they keep it suppressed. What started the problem was that in the Civil War, the American Civil War, in order to help fund the North put a very high taxes on the production of alcohol. It was about $2.10 a gallon. Prior to that, you had this new thing called kerosene, made from petroleum oil, and then you had alcohol that was used for heating and lighting and various things. And they were both equivalent in price, let's say about 15 cents a gallon. Well, by putting the $2.10 a gallon tax on ethanol, on alcohol, it now made it $2.25 a gallon, as compared to they put 10 cents on kerosene. So you had 25 cents compared to $2.25.
So this was done to fund a war,
Yes,
a civil war.
yes, the American Civil War. And $2.25 was equivalent to the average paycheck of an American in those years. So,
The average paycheck.
yes.
So this is a lot of money.
It was a lot of money. $2.25 was a lot of money. And so if you said to that average person, do you want to spend your paycheck on
Gallon
a
of
gallon
ethanol.
of alcohol, or do you that you're going to use for lighting, or you want to spend 25 cents to get this kerosene that is going to smell funny, and it has a black smoke. But this was all in the years before anybody cared about that stuff.
Or had it, they may have cared, but they had no knowledge of what the impact was.
Right,
yeah.
right. So consequently, kerosene, people like John Rockefeller get very, very rich. Mm-hmm. Well, the tax, once you put a tax on something, it's very hard to get rid of it. The tax remained, and it remained until 1907. So a lot of years, 40-something years. And what that did was and those were in the years of the development of the automobile, and even now getting close, of course, to the airplane.
Right, so Henry Ford's starting now to pump out Model Ts, and he's, of course, picked gasoline because it's the cheaper alternative.
Well, actually, his Model T was designed to do kerosene, gasoline, and alcohol, ethanol.
Oh,
right?
So it was
It was the flex fuel car. It was
Right from the start.
Right from the start. Right.
Wow. Okay.
And it had a little, it had a couple of things on the steering wheel. Mm-hmm. You would tune. It had a little thing over here you would press, and it would change the carburation, and it would change the air mixture, the mixture of the fuel, and all that stuff. And so any place you were, you could use whatever was available to you, right? Huh. And so you would run into a hardware store, or if you were a farmer, you were living in the middle of the country, and nobody has gasoline, nobody's selling gasoline. So, but you have land, you make your own ethanol, and there you go. Right?
You'd cook it up.
Yeah.
You'd have your still.
Right.
Yeah.
And the Model T was the number one selling car for about 20 years. The world's number one selling car for almost 20 years. And so during most of those years, the Model T could handle all the fuels. But, of course, in 1919, we have Prohibition.
There's our second break. We'll be back in a moment.
Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program.
So, to be careful for time,
yes.
I want to push forward a little bit, okay? We now have, so this is the legacy of it. What's preventing us now from embracing it? Because when I bring the topic up with people, they go, well, aren't there problems? And like, are we going to be able to produce enough crops? What's that going to do to farmland? How's it going to affect the food supply? And so on. What are the barriers at the moment? And do you think that we can overcome them? And if so, how do we do that?
Okay. The barriers are all lies. They're all lies created by the petroleum industry, by big oil. There are 6 or 7 of the main myths that they talk about. And one is land, one is that it hurts your engines, that it hurts the rubber and the plastic and the metal, that it doesn't get enough mileage, that it has lower BTUs, which therefore means you get lower mileage, less energy content. All of that is a lie. It's all completely lies. And I've spent a lot of years, and a lot of people who I know or know of who are also advocates of ethanol have spent a lot of time in debunking these things. But it's very, very hard to do when you're facing something like the oil industry that has the kind of money and the kind of political power that they have. Mm-hmm. But
they also have the network to deliver their product.
Yes, that of course is true. Mm-hmm. Right. And in fact, the ethanol industry is reliant upon that. And one of the things that's interesting about ethanol is that they sort of the ethanol industry has to be a little bit careful because their biggest customer is the oil industry. Right. And so,
okay. So why has this become so important to you? Because you don't really have a stake in this game, and yet it's something that clearly is a passion of yours.
And people ask me that, and my joke about that is well, it's from all the years growing up in Brooklyn on the farms that I worked as a kid. And of course, there are no farms in Brooklyn.
Right.
Probably
like
haven't been
when,
for 200
when were
years.
the farms there?
But, it just became a thing for both my partner and I. And it really started My interest in it actually started way back in the 70s. I happened to be in the main library in Manhattan doing some research for a client of mine, an advertising client, and there was a book on the table about making ethanol out of corn or, crops, making fuel. And I sat and I looked at it, read it a bit, and I wound up sitting there for a couple hours. It absolutely floored me. The potential, the market, the business potential of it was astronomical. I mean, it just was incredible. But I'm a guy from Brooklyn, so I sat there and said, well, what am I going to do? Put this in my silos in Brooklyn? There are no silos in Flatbush, right? It doesn't happen. Right. So it was dormant, but I had always been involved in cars of some sort. Certainly because I've had, as an owner, some interesting old cars. Had an interesting old boat. So I've known some things about engines and how to work on certain things and all that. Bob's the same way. Well, in about 2002, 2003, when the economy was really bad, Bob and I were thinking, well, what could we do as two simple Brooklyn guys to help the economy of America and the free world and the world? And we really started to pay attention to alternative fuels. And before that, I would say that we just reported on it.
Third and final break. We'll be right back.
Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program.
So you went out and tested. I'm keeping an eye on time, and I want to get to a couple of points here. You went out and tested it. You converted, you had a flex fuel Taurus, wasn't it Taurus?
Not a flex fuel, a non-flex fuel Taurus. And
yet you still ran ethanol.
Oh, yeah. I ran E85 in it. I ran all kinds of blends. I do what's called splash blending, which is you pull up to the E85 pump, you put in whatever you want to put in, then you go up to the next pump and you put that in and you do some calculations and you figure out, oh, I'm running at E40 or E50 or E60 or E20, whatever it is. And so I did all those tests. And those were all as an outgrowth of the testing I had done on rental cars and also on press cars that I would get. Typically, I would get a car a week, sometimes 2 cars a week to test drive for reviews. And I would fill them up and I would, what would happen if I put in a gallon? Car companies may not want to hear this, but now it's too late. But, it would be like, well, what if I put in a gallon of E85 into this? What's going to happen? Well, nothing happened. The car ran fine. Well, what if I put 2 gallons in next time?
So what are the benefits to individual car owners and users of running ethanol versus gasoline?
Well, of course, you could save money on every gallon that you buy. Now, people will say, but you get less mileage. And that part's true. But it's true because the engine is designed to be optimized for gasoline. So obviously, you're going to put something else in it, it's not going to work quite as good.
Yeah.
Some people want to say that, well, that has to do with the energy content, the BTUs. It has nothing to do with it because you could take a comparable engine that is optimized for ethanol and it will get as many miles per gallon or more than the gasoline engine running on gasoline.
So it's not going to harm your car?
No.
It's going to clean up the engine?
Cleans the engine.
Cleans the air?
Right.
Or has a completely different impact?
Right.
Will save you money.
And it helps the farmers. Helps the farmers in whichever country you're in. And
Because
it
they're
helps
selling more crops.
to sell more crops. And of course, so people will talk about corn, and time is a problem here, so I'm going to shortcut this. But people will say, well, corn, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't have to be corn. Corn is just one of the things that we happen to have in the United States. We happen to have a lot of guys who know how to grow corn. And we have the right temperatures, the right climate conditions for it. But, in Australia...
You can make alcohol out of potatoes as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You could do it in desert conditions. You could do it from agave. Australia is moving that way.
So ideally, what would you like to see happen? Like you're doing all of this. You're not getting a direct benefit out of it. What do you want to see happen?
In 2008, I wrote a paper that said, let's end gasoline. All new gasoline-powered vehicle engines should be banned 5 years from today. So 2008, that was 2013, 14. We're now
missed
way
that
past
deadline,
that. Yeah.
yes.
So I no longer say, let's do it in 5 years. I say now. I say now. They should say right now, all new engines that come out of the car companies should be optimized to run on ethanol. And there's virtually nothing that has to get changed. I mean, there are three elements that need to be changed, but there's no true cost factor, because it's if you were to say, well, we're going to have this fuel injector instead of this fuel injector, well, the volume discount that you're getting for the gasoline fuel injector, you're going to get for the ethanol fuel injector, so it's the same price. Doesn't matter, right? So it's not, nothing is happening. People say, well, the plastic, the rubber, all that stuff. Ethanol is compatible with more rubber, plastic, and metals than gasoline, benzene, toluene, and xylene. But people don't know that. So in my book, for example, I have a lot of databases and charts to show that. And people want to argue with me, and I say, not my chart, go look.
Okay, let me end on this note. Do we have it within our power as individuals to go and get the conversion of the injectors in our own vehicles and just start buying ethanol? And would you recommend that we do that?
Yeah. If you wanted to really run high-level ethanol gasoline blend, what you would do is there are these kits that you put on your engine, and it makes an adjustment. And the adjustment basically tells the computer. Because what has to happen is the engine can handle it. It's the computer has to understand that something else is in here. So you can get that. But what I proved with my personal experimentation on my Taurus was that I didn't need to do anything, and it ran fine. And there are tests that are done. Glacial Lakes, one of the ethanol companies, did some really great studies on this, but other people also, that show that actually E30, something around E30, E40, there's something about it that actually you will get better miles per gallon on an E30 than you will from E10, E85, or, of course, E0.
And so we can already start to use our consumer dollars to force that change, because if we start buying more, they'll supply more.
Yes.
It's within our power.
It's within our power, and we just need more people to do it, and we need to put pressure on politicians to say, yeah, let's do it. Brazil uses E27, right? It's basically
close to
twice as
E15.
much as E15, 3 times as much as E10. Their vehicles and their power tools are exactly the same as ours. Exactly the same. And it all runs fine on E27. How is that possible? And Brazil is going to move to E40 probably sometime in the next 7 years.
Wow.
6, 7 years. So why don't we do it? So all it's going to take is somebody to say, let's do it.
Well, you've encouraged me to really start to look at that. Thank you for coming in
Thank you.
and sharing that with us.
Thank you.